Good evening. If you live in New York City like me, you probably noticed that today was as hot as the fires of hell. Not really, but it was in the 90s and completely miserable. And have you ever noticed that when you take the train a couple stops into the suburbs in Jersey or Westchester, it's suddenly so much cooler? What is going on there? It's not a myth. New York City really is several degrees hotter during the summers than the suburbs are. What's going on? Well, what's going on is the urban heat island effect, and I'm going to talk a little bit about factors that contribute to the urban heat island effect. First of all, let's talk about the term albedo. Albedo refers to the amount of light absorbed by an object and amount of light reflected by an object. New York City is made of a ton of impermeable dark surfaces. Think the metal of skyscrapers, the asphalt of the streets, the asphalt of parking lots, the roofs of buildings. All of these surfaces have very low albedo, which means that they absorb tons of light. So objects with low albedos tend to be dark and impermeable. So think about wearing black jeans on a hot day. They absorb all the heat. They don't emit it. And that's an issue for a city. And another thing that happens is that when you have a bunch of skyscrapers, these impermeable surfaces create these heat canyons where normally heat might be reflected off of the object back into the sky. When there's so little sky view on the object, they end up just kind of bouncing the heat around to each other and reflecting it and then reabsorbing it. So then areas in between skyscrapers on a hard sidewalk are even hotter than they would be. So another thing that contributes to the urban heat island effect is lack of green space. Why do plants cool down an area? So the most obvious answer is you stand under a tree, it gives you shade. It's cooler in the shade than it is just out in the sun. Obviously, we all know that. However, that's not the whole story. Plants also undergo a process called transpiration. It's kind of like a plant sweating. Basically, when it gets really hot outside, plants emit excess water from their leaves, which cools them off. It also cools down the air around us. The way I like to see it is that the trees in Central Park are like the little mini misters that they have at amusement parks where they spray water into the air and cool everybody off. And trees are doing all of this for us, and we don't even realize it. But the thing is, there's tons of places in New York City that don't have as many trees as Central Park does, and there's tons of places where people don't have access to green space, and it makes the whole city a lot hotter. A third factor that contributes to the urban heat island effect is simply the heat of organic material. Like humans, we emit a lot of heat, and there's not really that much we can do about it if we live in a city of this many people. However, rotting organic material, there's a lot of garbage in our streets, and garbage gives off heat. So that's too bad. There's just a lot of people in New York City, and we generate a lot of waste. But why does this matter? Obviously, it's uncomfortable and we don't like it. But it has some serious real-world consequences. I mean, for one thing, people pay more for air conditioning bills all summer, and that's a really big deal, especially for the impoverished. There's been over and over found a link between the level of heat in a city and the amount of violent crime that goes on in a city. There's this idea that when it gets really hot in the summers, it makes people restless and more irritable. And another thing is that the urban heat island effect can cause tons of stress on the elderly. It can make them more likely to die if they're alone in a hot apartment and have a heart attack or undergo some kind of stress. It's a big deal. And this is a human-created problem. By building more green infrastructure in our cities, by building more green roofs, or just by cultivating, literally by putting a flower pot on your fire escape, you are doing a small amount to offset the urban heat island effect. And it's within our power. But in the meantime, if you just really need to shake your fist at something while it's super hot outside and you're walking down the street, just blame the urban heat island effect and the poor urban planning that exacerbates the problem. Stay cool, guys. Good night.